Harry Potter is an unstoppable franchise at this point. Every attempt to quash it has failed, from the Christian groups in the 90s to the people trying to boycott Hogwarts Legacy.
Yeah, but you do realize why we're doing that, right? We're not just trying to defeat an unstoppable franchise. It's tied to something bigger, something tied to genocide. Hi, everyone. Today, I wanted to respond to a video by the Birdman talking about racism and Harry Potter, but also transphobia, specifically because the Birdman, who is a person of color, an American person of color, is more than happy to discuss racism while debating, in a parasocial manner, mind you, racist YouTube content creators. They're also making some transphobic arguments as well, in ways that I want to discuss here. I'm an expert of tokenism in a variety of ways, stemming not just from transphobia and TERFs, but also various other modules thereof, including tokenism in populations of color in the United States or elsewhere. So that's primarily what I'm going to be talking about, specifically critiquing the Birdman, making arguments that are more moderate in their tokenism regarding trans people and Harry Potter. They're saying a lot of things that are correct, but they're also saying some stuff that's not so correct. And some of the stuff that they're wrong about is academic in origin, hence what inspired me originally to respond to this video at all. My initial response to them was as follows: I'm trans and I make shit. J.K. Rowling is a Nazi, and putting money into Harry Potter goes towards harming trans people. Asking for basic human rights isn't our pound of flesh, as the Birdman puts it, nor are we anti-creation. Then again, I think the language of left-right ties to imperial models that distract from effective rebellion, but I digress. Harry Potter funds fascism, which targets trans people, racial minorities, and other marginalized groups, often by tokenizing them, e.g. Snape being a sniveling incel weirdo, regardless of skin color. This was the original statement that I wrote in response to them and their comment about people on the left, activists more broadly, asking for our so-called pound of flesh, which I'll unpack deeper in. And what I want to do is go through their video, talk about it piece by piece, and also give some examples of trans people in and out of Harry Potter who are experiencing transphobia from a variety of people. Lastly, before we start, I just want to give my usual disclaimer. I use the same disclaimer in all of my essays, videos, reactions, etc. Disclaimer regarding essay contents: all opinions are my own, i.e. as part of my research conducted alongside my book series Gothic Communism. The material within is written speaks about public figures and popular media for purposes of sex education, satire, transformation, and critique, hence falls under fair use regarding copyright and free speech regarding defamation, obscenity laws, the Miller test. And while this is the content warning for a different essay, it largely discusses the same basic things: fascism, the Holocaust, genocide, and SA, police brutality, and carceral violence, transphobia, racism, and sexism. So, different essay, same exact content warning, same exact stuff that I'll be talking about, specifically tokenism. So, before we get started, I just want to say that racism and tokenism are things that I've written about extensively, so much in fact that I have entire sections dedicated to basically a compendium of different topics I've written about that include things that discuss racism in the periphery, but also things that are a little bit more direct. So, for instance, my work on Metroidvania, BDSM, Tolkien, Amazons, etc. all discuss racism to some extent, but to make it a little bit more dialed in, I actually have a section about anti-Zionism and anti-racism, anti-white supremacy. My research/activism into anti-Zionism and anti-racism, anti-white supremacy, and anti-war concerns various essays I have written, but also personalities. It's less generalized than my anti-fascism corpus, which, while my book series explores fascism holistically, only tackles a handful of persons tied to fascism as a larger topic, which overlaps with Zionism, but I digress. For the sake of organization and time, I divided my anti-Zionist work into essays, i.e. in conjunction with my sex positivity book series after it concluded on June 2025. This subpage mostly contains essays written after that date. Click here to access all of said series' promotional content and different essays it contains, which explore racism in popular media like Star Wars, Castlevania, and Lord of the Rings. And if we scroll down, I give a summary about Zionism. In particular, I talk about state vampirism, which racism connects to because the state feeds on nature and workers more broadly through racist ideologies that tie to other modules of state power. So the state is settler colonial, Cartesian, and heteronormative. We'll get into that. So I have essays on Zionism and videos. I have essays and works on racism, ranging from white moderates to heavy metal, racism and ableism, Orientalism and the Gothic, and my scholarship on Tolkien, and various pieces about war, media, territory, and play, which is generally mapped out in spaces of play that sell war and manufactured conflict, scarcity, and consent to different people. The examples I give here being from Metroidvania, Silk Song, Axiom Verge, Myth the Fallen Lords by Bungie, and Tolkien's Treasure Map. But I also think Harry Potter falls within that bailiwick, given it is essentially a neoliberal piece of media concerned with the rise of evil and combating it in highly moderate ways that are tied to the profit motive. It's something to franchise in a highly centrist way. And as we get into talking about the Birdman and his thoughts and feelings about racism and the Harry Potter fandom, while being moderately transphobic himself, these topics will come up. So I strongly recommend looking at all of this. It is all relevant, I promise. So all of that being said, we are going to primarily be looking at the Birdman's video, talking about Harry Potter and the curious case of Black Snape, with some transphobic attitudes and also strangely anti-academic or clumsy attitudes or viewpoints about academia and the analysis of racism in popular media. I wasn't expecting that part, but at the same time it does come up, so this is what we'll be focusing on. But I wanted to sort of front load with some different things, food for thought, before we get started. And that's largely attitudes about trans people from trans people, white or otherwise. That includes me, obviously, as a trans woman, but there are other people as well who are also talking about racism and transphobia and Harry Potter, largely at the same time. Why is transphobia getting worse in the Black community? Nobody talks about this. By Alazia, and I responded initially to this. Much of my work as a trans researcher covers tokenism, including TERFs in BIPOC communities, a difficult topic to discuss, but a vital one, where this individual, Alazia, the author, is talking about transphobia being normalized in the Black community. If we open this video, for instance, we'll see them talking about that.
I don't engage in the pronoun discussion. It's either he or she.
Oh, and another thing, I'm not letting no transformer tell me I'm a cis woman. No, I'm a woman, cis.
You look more like a than me.
That's fine, but I'm a real woman.
Right,
I
but
look
you
like a
don't
nigga
look
all day.
like
I used to be a stud, so I'm
just
okay.
saying, though.
I'm okay with looking like a nigga. I used to be a stud. I
I'm
used to
being
have
real,
bad
though. I'm gonna be real.
That's cool.
You look like a man.
That's fine, but
Your
I'm not one.
shoulders are broad.
But I'm not one.
Your ass is
But
flat.
you are one.
You probably
You know what's crazy? Whenever people talk about LGBTQ issues, especially in the Black community, the conversation really gets uncomfortable really fast.
Yeah, the conversation here that's being raised by Alazia is that transphobia is something that exists in the Black community, and this extends from other things that were adopted within said community, taken during the transatlantic slave trade to America as diasporic slaves, eventually emancipated during the Civil War, into Jim Crow, into the Civil Rights Movement, and various ways that they had to survive under American hegemony, they would adopt various harmful belief systems from the West, namely homophobia. Homophobia is a Western idea predominantly, and if you don't believe me, you can look at examples of queer people in indigenous cultures, Two-Spirit people, for example. You can look at queerness in Japanese cultures, in China or the Ottoman Empire, for example, where the love between people of within just the gender binary alone, people of the same sex, of the same gender, was something that existed. And in the West, especially the Renaissance into capitalism, you saw a rise of an enforcement of the ancient canonical laws of the nuclear model out of ancient Greece and Rome into the Renaissance, into the development of capitalism. The West became increasingly, under a Protestant ethic in particular, homophobic. And this is something that would be passed along through victims of Western hegemony, the global North, but also the global South, and in non-Western countries, Arabic countries, in Africa and various other places under apartheid, under imperialism, would either adopt or preserve aspects of their own conservative cultures that survived under imperialism. So if that happened far away in foreign lands, it also would happen in America. And American people of color, indigenous people, black and brown people, some of whom would adopt Western notions of homophobia and by extension transphobia, and that has continued into the present. Muhammad Ali, who believed, as a member of the Nation of Islam, that if a black man slept with a white woman, he should be put to death, where his attitudes towards white women and black men is that they should not have relationships. And there was a separatist idea there. And if there is something like that going on, there is also homophobia. There's also transphobia. So any kind of bigotry that you could think of is basically a symptom of capital during generational trauma, kettling different groups, dividing them, and then having them conquer not just themselves, black men being bigoted towards black women within their own communities, but also trans men, women, and intersex people of color, but going out into other communities and policing those communities as well. It is essentially people within a larger prison going between cell blocks and policing each other, except this is a larger de facto prison. It isn't an official institution to incarcerate inmates who have committed some kind of crime, but a larger open-air prison, a settler colony, a police state. And any minority or marginalized group, more broadly, can police other groups. So that's something to keep in mind. It is something that is addressed not just by me, but by trans women of color. Transphobia is getting worse in the black community. This isn't about hate, it's about awareness, real experiences, and starting a conversation that needs to happen. And this is a conversation that needs to happen among our own communities and reaching across the aisle to other communities to have these kinds of conversations and recognizing that workers can betray each other and themselves. They betray their own interests by punching down at other groups who have similar, if different, flavors of oppression and privilege. There is no one group that has universal oppression. We are all oppressed differently, but it serves capital if we betray ourselves and each other. A bigotry for one is a bigotry for all. If someone is fighting against racism, but they decide to be transphobic, they are ultimately still being racist. However, there's also this discussion of transphobia in Harry Potter more broadly, which is something that is discussed by trans people regardless of their ethnicity. This includes myself, of course, but also someone I deeply respect, Essence of Thought, who has discussed, in their work, dating back years, mind you, J.K. Rowling's transphobia and other anti-LGBT plus bigotries. This video is from 5 years ago, for instance, and it discusses things like conversion therapy, vis-a-vis transphobia, homophobia, suicide, child abuse, and SA, etc. J.K. Rowling is in the Epstein files, but it gets worse. But more germane to this video and what we'll be talking about, how J.K. Rowling turned Harry Potter into a symbol of hate. And specifically, this discusses, if memory serves, what J.K. Rowling's transphobia in Harry Potter serves. So if we open this video, for instance, it gives a variety of quick references, but also Rowling funding movements which seek the eradication of trans people from public life, along with terrorizing intersex people, Jewish people, women of color, and even survivors of breast cancer, has turned Harry Potter into nothing but a symbol of hate, a threat to all those listed. Essentially, the thesis of Ethel's video, the money made by J.K. Rowling and company through the franchise is something that basically upholds transphobia, that upholds racism, that upholds fascism more broadly. In other words, that's why people are boycotting Harry Potter, not just the video game that the Birdman mentions. The boycott concerns preventing genocide that is effectively being whitewashed, pinkwashed, and tokenized through Harry Potter as a neoliberal franchise that has fascist origins that are disguised to a centrist monomyth refrain. The boy who lived, he goes on to embark on the hero's journey, and there is a great number of bigoted things going on just within J.K. Rowling's books, let alone what she's doing presently with the various media and money through said media that she uses to conduct fascist actions under capital. Fascism is capital defending itself and conducting itself accordingly. And J.K. Rowling isn't just anyone complaining about trans people. They're a billionaire who uses the money that they make to enact genocide, exploitation more broadly, targeting specific groups. And she is very targeted in her exploitation of trans people after writing her books, but into the continuation of the franchise. Also, I feel as though I should point out that people who are against slavery, which fascism requires in order to function, e.g. the global south versus the global north in geopolitical terms, but also within the United States, you have the north versus the south, a plantation society versus a factory society, whereas factory labor would exploit the global south. The south in America, more locally on that particular continent, Turtle Island, would conduct slavery against African slaves taken to America. So there are different registers on which this kind of thing can occur. And as far as that goes, it is important to recognize that abolitionists historically have challenged slavery where they're at. So Frederick Douglass, for instance, in America was an abolitionist. There was John Brown in the raid on Harper's Ferry, a white man who was an abolitionist who challenged slavery by killing slavers. In Britain, they didn't necessarily always lead to, a slave revolt, physical violence, but they had other ways of challenging slavery in Britain, which outlawed slavery before they did so in the United States. Abolitionists who challenged the Caribbean slave trade, African slaves were taken to the Caribbean to work in sugarcane fields, which, unlike cotton, grew year-round, which means they could work the slaves year-round instead of giving them a moment of rest. And they would work the slaves to death. And to protest that, abolitionists in Britain would, for example, instead of buying sugar, they would purchase honey, which wasn't incumbent on slave labor in the Caribbean through the transatlantic slave trade on the British side of things. Abolitionists and those who challenged slavery would absolutely vote with their wallets. And I'm not saying this is the end-all be-all, but using that as a means of raising awareness about slavery, the two of those things went hand in hand. And Harry Potter, if you support Harry Potter, to some degree, you are supporting fascism and racism. And you can't just say, well, look, they have a black person. That's, for all intents and purposes, whitewashing the fascist aspects of Harry Potter by slapping a black actor on the cover. And that doesn't mean that the black actor can't do something anti-racist in their performance, but they are working within a franchise, and capital more broadly, that despite the progressive veneer is ultimately just rainbow capitalism. Rainbow capitalism isn't just about sex and gender, but also about race and class struggle as well. So it's important to recognize that having people who are abolitionists who want to challenge various things about fascism through capital can absolutely embargo a franchise. Birdman is apologizing for fascism and J.K. Rowling by saying, I don't understand why you people challenge Harry Potter. It's the too big to fail, and is overlooking the racist implications of that alongside the transphobic statements that they're making about J.K. Rowling. Just complaining about trans people as though it's just J.K. Rowling and not the fact that they're a billionaire and that the larger franchise has racist, transphobic, sexist, fatphobic, ableist elements, etc. That's why people are boycotting Harry Potter. It's not just the left asking for their pound of flesh, which is a statement, I would add, that the Birdman says in their video, in a way that I feel is, among other things, bigoted unto itself. The pound of flesh is a statement that goes back to Blood Libel. It goes back to Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, or Shylock, oppressed by the Christians of Shakespeare's imaginary Venice, demands his pound of flesh. And it's essentially a similar argument that J.K. Rowling would make against activists who are fighting slavery in her own book series. And she would make fun of Hermione, and Ron Weasley would apologize for slavery in that book by telling Hermione, oh, you shouldn't fight slavery. If the slaves are happy, then they're happy. House elves, house slaves. House slaves have it better than field slaves, so that's good enough, right? So if Ron Weasley is apologizing for slavery in the book series, the Birdman is making the argument a pound of flesh. Oh, careful, you're asking for a pound of flesh from the people that you're punching up against, from the franchise and the system of capital that you're punching up against through a struggle that is both class, racial, and cultural. It's an intersectional, holistic struggle where we can't have any scapegoats. Then you saying, oh, well, people on the left are asking for their pound of flesh, that would suggest that the Birdman is actually centrist and they're defending J.K. Rowling in moderate ways. And despite the fact that they're debating openly racist people within the Harry Potter franchise in their own video, they're making money off of that while punching down themselves in a moderate way. They are, unto themselves, a grifter. But what have the cast said about J.K.? And this is by Matriarch Type. From Nothing to Nothing Good, this week we're taking a look at what the adult cast of the new Harry Potter HBO series has said about J.K. Rowling's constant attack on trans people. So this is yet another example of different people who have stances on Rowling's transphobia, including the cast and crew, who are unto themselves not always white, and they have different thoughts and feelings. So this is yet another example of a video that's being discussed. It's not just the video, but also people talking about it. So if you want to look at this, one example that I can remember off the top of my head was John Lithgow, who was basically sort of mentioning that J.K. Rowling was problematic, for instance, but at the same time taking money to be in a franchise. You have to keep in mind that actors who exist within these spaces are ultimately being paid. So take that context in mind and be like, apply it to some other hypothetical historically, like alternate history. What if you were in Nazi Germany, for instance, and you decided to be in a Nazi film and take money that was ultimately part of a franchise or a film that punched down against different minorities, including, I might add, people of color and queer people, both of which the Nazi regime attacked during its rise to power. It would basically tokenize different groups and have them police themselves. And the victims of the Holocaust weren't just Jewish people alone, but a variety of other people. The Roma, people of color from formerly German colonies that they had lost a hold of during the interwar period that were stuck in Germany, and homosexuals, trans people, practitioners of BDSM, etc. So This isn't something that didn't exist historically in Germany, which borrowed its ideas, I might add, from America, which was unto itself founded on genocide that attacked indigenous peoples, but also would continue preying upon people of color and gender nonconforming people under its own purview into Pax Americana. This kind of thing is absolutely why we should recognize that various individuals within the cast and crew of Harry Potter don't have a lot to say that's positive about J.K. Rowling. So if you want to watch this video in particular, give it a look, because it will be pretty illuminating and it will discuss things that talk about J.K. Rowling in ways that, as we'll see with the Birdman, they just kind of sweep under the rug. They're like, oh, you know, J.K. Rowling is whining about trans people, but people who critique her are asking for their pound of flesh, and also the franchise is too big to fail. And what about racism? Did I mention racism? Well, kind of overlooking the intersecting qualities of different modules of oppression and resisting that oppression. They largely limit the conversation to racism and talking about the actor who plays Snape. It's low-hanging fruit because they're going after super openly racist people while sweeping the larger problems of the franchise and the fact that it exists in the first place in ways that don't really challenge all of these bigotries in a way that avoids scapegoats. And you have, well, look at this person that we hired to play Snape, and which I would argue is a problem unto itself because Snape is a highly problematic character. So they're like, well, we had a black person play Snape. I'm like, that's not even good representation. Snape is a terrible character for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, because he's basically an incel and a Nazi who leaves the group, rejoins it, and tortures the child of the woman he loved because said woman had the child with another person. So you can't just make the character black and then say, oh, well, it's racist if you have anything to say about the character. And even if you go after low-hanging fruit, like openly bigoted reactionary people in the Harry Potter fandom, it's still possible to be moderately bigoted the way that the Birdman is. Lastly, my partner on Facebook sent me this, and I wanted to play it because it talks about talking with a trans woman in ways where I want to give a trans perspective about the kinds of things that are often concerning trans women that are commonplace in these kinds of dialogues that are unto themselves being swept under the rug. And this is just one short little example, but it's basically saying, like, look, we're not monsters. At least we're not monsters that deserve to be attacked by the state. The various forms of reactionary to moderate violence to the Harry Potter franchise will overlook or even encourage the demonizing of people like the person in this video.
About surgery?
Like, I wouldn't ask you right now about, like, okay, let's talk about what's in your pants.
I'm willing already.
But that's after we shoot. You wouldn't ask somebody about their privates, and then all of a sudden, because they're trans, you feel like you can. My parents have said, like, when they tell their friends, the first question they'll ask is like, oh, is Dylan getting the surgery? Ew, don't talk to my parents about my private parts, you nasty perv. And I feel bad because I'm like, oh my God, like, my family should not have to answer that question.
Yeah. Why do you think it's become synonymous with trans?
So them in their mind, they want to label me either as a girl with a penis or a girl with a vagina. Like, that's how their heads work, and they're like, okay, we just need to know which...
More importantly, it's how J.K. Rowling's mind works, and these dialogues through Harry Potter is a continuous franchise that keeps being revived. It has become increasingly transphobic over time, and in ways that are increasingly racist, I would add, by tokenizing people of color to play deeply problematic characters in light of trans genocide. Trans genocide isn't just, oh, the franchise said something mean about us. It actually involves trans people being thrown into prisons in America and elsewhere under fascism, basically forcing us to undergo conversion therapy. It's experimenting on people in a Holocaust-style way that is being overlooked by a variety of other minorities who are basically like, this ain't our fight, better them than us, including people of color.
Which box to put Dylan in. I can't wait till we get to a place where someone says they're a woman, we believe they're a woman because they said so.
Everyone's just obsessed, like, of about the bottom surgery. A lot of cis people kind of get really fixated on.
Like it's a requirement?
Some people believe that. The majority of trans people, men and women, don't get bottom surgery.
I got a vasectomy, but I didn't get bottom surgery. It's up to the individual if they feel comfortable about that. A lot of people don't because there are potential side effects. Any surgery, something can go wrong. You could die during the surgery, let alone side effects afterwards. And once you do, it's irreversible, and that is something that trans people, like anyone, keeps in mind. They have to weigh the pros and the cons. And do they want to have an irreversible gender surgery that has medical documents, a paper trail during fascism? And that is something to keep in mind, alongside the fact that these are the kinds of people that are embargoing or boycotting Harry Potter the franchise, because the money made through said franchise is funding bigotry that affects every aspect of society through popular media, but also the government. J.K. Rowling has ties to Epstein. J.K. Rowling has ties to fascism. J.K. Rowling is someone who uses the money that they make to attack people like these individuals. So this is enough of the reel in question, but if you want to watch it, I will leave it in the description of my video. But we have enough information now, I think, to get started. One last bit of context before we get started is the Birdman is a professional voice actor who exposes grifters on YouTube in particular. They specialize in comics, movies, franchised material, the kind of material that has a fandom. And they are a moderately tokenized person of color. And the interesting thing about them, and something I want you to keep in mind, is that they themselves are someone who makes a lot of good points. But this is probably the first video of theirs that I remember watching where they start to say things that are pretty suspect. And it has to do with racism and transphobia in defense of Harry Potter. And I thought, let's just see where this goes. But now they've shown their ass a bit more, put their foot in their mouth in a way, or I actually do want to say more about them. All right, I think that's everything. All of that being said, let's get started.
I wrote an entirely different video about The Bride that was supposed to be released by now, and believe me, it's still coming. But then HBO decided to drop the trailer for the Harry Potter show, and of course the vultures began licking their chops at yet another opportunity to grift. And
I also want to say that HBO is a television network that makes shows centered around profit, and they will make all kinds of different forms of media that are unto themselves imperfect. Just look at Chernobyl and Red Scare and punching down against nuclear power in ways that are not just scientifically inaccurate, but through Red Scare propaganda, historically inaccurate, ahistorical in ways that defend fossil fuels, and by extension, the war in Iran, the hegemony of that particular industry of fossil fuels, of fascism, the monopoly of war, the military-industrial complex, etc. So HBO is not like some sacred institution that's beyond criticism.
this one's a little special because, at least on the internet, this one seems to be receiving hate from all sides of the political spectrum. Those on the left are, predictably, looking for their pound of flesh, given who...
The way that they say that, well, predictably, they're looking for their pound of flesh, which, again, is an anti-Semitic trope that punches down against people with legitimate grievances from positions of oppression. R.E. Shylock from The Merchant of Venice, where it's most famously sort of codified in the Renaissance era into capitalism, the Protestant ethic at large. So, they're looking for their pound of flesh. So this is, unto itself, a red flag. This is moderately bigoted. This is a centrist, a person of color, I might add, prone to defending different franchises and profit, punching down against people who are well within their rights to critique J.K. Rowling and her franchise. Not all of whom are white, by the way. There are trans people who aren't white. So this, in effect, makes the Birdman racist and transphobic in a moderate way.
created this series, and those on the right are mad about a so-called race swap regarding none other than Hermione. You thought I was going to say Snape, didn't you? Don't worry, we'll get to that. Your favorite batch of anti-creators have all decided to throw their dunce caps into the ring, so let's have a look-see, shall we?
The Harry Potter series and I have a complex relationship. The books kind of passed me by in the 90s because angsty teenage drinker was more into serious, pretentious fantasy at the time, so...
Lord of the Rings? I will say that I grew up on these books. Around the time that they started to take off, my mother and grandmother worked in different bookstores, which should tell you, that definitely dates me. But, I had access to physical books when they were being sold as the main form of media. This was before the internet really took off. It existed in the 90s, but to a lesser degree.
So I never really fell in love with them and grew up with Harry, Ron, and Hermione.
It's important also for me to say that while I grew up with these stories, I very quickly grew out of them. So by the time I was in middle school, I had read the first few books. I read them to my family. Point in fact, I identified with Harry. And then what ended up happening as time went on, by the time I was in high school, the stories didn't have the same effect on me. They didn't hold the same spell over me. Eventually, I just sort of grew apart from it. I remember reading about the fifth book, I think, and then after that, I just sort of lost interest. Partly it took too long for her to release the books, and I just moved on to other things. But as time went on, and I became increasingly prone to acknowledging my queer side, I realized that I perhaps lost interest because of other things that I wasn't aware of at the time, but would become aware of later on. As my egg emerged, cracked, started to hatch, I realized that J.K. Rowling was a piece of shit. And it wasn't really until the late 2010s when she opened her mouth and said, there are biological women and there are men in dresses, essentially. So at that point, it was pretty friggin' obvious. And from then on out, and the rise of TERFs and J.K. Rowling after Gamergate, all tied to franchise materials other than just Harry Potter, I might add, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Marvel films, what have you, I began to become much more critical of all of them in a way that I would speak out in defense of, for example, women and trans people vis-a-vis the Doom franchise, which led people to attacking me in a transphobic way for critiquing their franchise, despite the fact that I grew up with it. So any reactionary or moderate element of any franchise is going to punch down at anyone who tries to defend the usual victims of said franchise. Systemic victims, even if there are token examples of some protagonist or some character that exists in the story, and people will point that out, I'll be like, yeah, but it's rainbow capitalism. And they'll be like, well, you're being transphobic. I had trans people telling me, a trans woman, that I was being transphobic for wanting more representation in Doom for trans people, despite growing up with that franchise myself. The same exact ideas apply to Harry Potter. Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss. Not just transphobia, but also racism. Black skin, white masks are a Franz Fanon.
So many other people did. Likewise, when the movies came out in the early 2000s, I didn't have any context for whether they were faithful adaptations or not.
It's important to recognize that the actor who played Hagrid in the original films is a deeply transphobic man. He was very openly bigoted in ways where, unlike some of the other actors, the child actors, like the actor who played Harry, Ron, and Hermione, were all, relatively speaking, not transphobic. But the actor who played Hagrid was openly transphobic. And as time went on, Daniel Radcliffe would become an increasing ally of trans people while moving away from the Harry Potter franchise. He moved away from it, he stopped taking her money, and he became an ally to trans people.
And I'll be honest here, the quirky, goofy, family-friendly tone of the early films didn't do much to win me over. I didn't hate them or anything, they just weren't really my cup of tea, so I was happy to let the fans get on with it.
Very strange position coming from the critical drinker. I mean, saying something wasn't his cup of tea, so he let the fans of the property enjoy it unmolested seems pretty noble. But it does beg the question, Why doesn't he do this for things regarding Disney, or feminism, or LGBTQ people, or ethnic minorities? Why does he always have something to say about those topics when, by his own admission, he's supposed to be ignoring things that aren't his cup of tea?
He's a reactionary, and he chooses a variety of things to feel reactionary about. It's how he makes his money.
Sounds like he's only doing this for the money, don't it?
But I was always kind of curious, because nothing achieves that level of cultural impact without something pretty fucking special to back it up. So, a couple of years ago, I girded my loins, grew my beard, and finally made the time to read the books and find out what all the fuss was about. And damn man, I believe that I finally understood the appeal of Harry Potter.
I don't want to say too much about the reactionary element of this video, because I want to focus on the moderate stuff, but I did want to give you some stuff up front. So I'm going to try and avoid the low-hanging fruit from here on out.
Now, drinker, I don't think you're in any position to criticize someone's writing, especially someone that's sold 100 times more books than you have subscribers.
Ignoring all the political stuff and looking at the number of books that she sold, yeah, she sold a lot, but she sold a lot by pandering in a very neoliberal centrist way that has a fascist core. She's not what I would consider to be an exceptional wordsmith, but that's not really something that I care about super much. Someone could be Charlie Day from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia and have terrible writing, or write with cutout pieces of magazine articles, and I would still be like, what's the message? What's the underlying message? It doesn't have to be an exceptionally well written from a syntax, grammar, vernacular standpoint for me to really respect it. Mouse, one of my favorite stories of all time, which admittedly is well done, is still at the end of the day a children's story that's told in the form of a graphic novel. A lot of people will look at that and dismiss it for being a graphic novel. Various things in the Gothic more broadly are seen as trash that is used to dismiss them out of hand. I'm not going to do that. But I am going to look at J.K. Rowling, who wrote a story that was incredibly derivative, but also pandering in highly problematic ways, and say the amount of copies that someone sells of something is an indication of its worth, ideologically speaking. Just look at Mein Kampf. That book was distributed all over the place in Nazi Germany, but just because it moved a lot of copies, largely because it was forced or compelled through the state, the same argument applies to capital more broadly. Something can sell a lot of copies and still be bad. The Birth of a Nation is an incredibly racist film, but it was basically the Star Wars of its day that shone in the White House under Woodrow Wilson's presidency, and it was incredibly famous. It was incredibly technically well made even, but its ideology is incredibly problematic. So the argument that the Birdman is making here is a flawed one, is a moderate one. It's successful because money equals success equals good argument, and that's just not true. All of the money that Rowling makes, point of fact, goes towards harmful things. So, in fact, I would be hoping that she would be less successful, but she is incredibly successful, and that is something that we should critique, not celebrate, unlike the Birdman here. And they're doing it to punch down against a reactionary individual.
I mean, your writing isn't exactly Shakespeare. And
Shakespeare, I would add, was bigoted in a variety of ways. Othello, the Moor of Venice, deeply racist story. The Merchant of Venice, unto itself, is anti-Semitic. And yet there are aspects of these stories that we can take and go on to do things that are subversive. But that takes active work. You don't want to just put Shakespeare on a pedestal, or J.K. Rowling on a pedestal, or anyone on a pedestal to just say, oh, well, you're just a reactionary, but I, a man of reason, am showing how wrong you are. But also, those leftists are asking for their pound of flesh from J.K. Rowling, who's just complaining about trans people. That's the problem with someone like the Birdman, is they are unto themselves a grifter because they make a considerable amount of money. This is a job for them, and they are deeply problematic unto themselves in a way that doesn't announce itself nearly as readily as someone like the Critical Drinker does.
The series was an impressive feat of imagination, and in a way, it did make me appreciate the movies from a whole new perspective. Now I understood just how much depth, world building, and complexity they had to cut and condense to fit some pretty fucking enormous books into a 2-hour narrative. What I'm trying to say with all this push is that I greeted the announcement of a new Harry Potter TV series on HBO with about the same level of enthusiasm I'd welcome the installation of a new toilet seat. I mean, it is an improvement, I guess, but is it really going to do anything revolutionary?
I really have a problem with this line of thinking. I mean, besides the fact that Drinker literally just contradicted himself, as he stated he read the novels and appreciated the world building, a lot of that being left out of the movies, which begs the question why he's questioning the existence of this media property.
The argument here is ultimately always going to be in defense of capital, in defense of a franchise. It's very centrist kind of stuff where, oh, well, what do you mean? You consume media, why are you defending it? And ultimately, there is a certain level of hypocrisy from the Critical Drinker, a deeply reactionary person that I'm not going to defend in any shape or form. My problem, again, is with the Birdman's argument, where they're not really getting to the root of the problem that goes after capital. They're always going to be defending a franchise while trying to make the Critical Drinker look dumb in a parasocial sort of debate. What they're saying never gets past the surface level stuff to get at the root of the larger problem, which is capital itself.
But my problem is exactly that. The Harry Potter films left out an incredible amount of detail, which I suppose is somewhat expected when translating a book to a film, but I think that's only ever expected because, for whatever reason, movie studios love cutting shit out of their adaptations, which bothers me as a source material enthusiast.
Sure, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, directed by Kenneth Branagh, did terrible, terrible things to the novel. Ultimately, though, I'm not entirely concerned with the purity of the source text, but whether or not it contains an original message, if said message was ultimately helpful. And in the case of Frankenstein, I would argue, yeah. And if you took something bigoted about Harry Potter and cut that out in favor of something less bigoted, then okay, sure, that's totally valid. But if you had something that wasn't bigoted and you cut it out in favor of something that either didn't do anything at all or was openly reactionary, then we would have a problem. So it's not about just being note for note identical, but does it add something positive to the story as far as activism goes?
People who are fans of the material only want what's in the source material, and people who don't know what's in the source material will happily consume a film or show that properly adapts that source material.
I would say that actually, no, I could be a fan of Frankenstein, but there are various smaller details in that story that I would probably alter or change, such as the ending and how it's sort of a both sides issue. I might say, oh, well, is Frankenstein the monster or is Victor Frankenstein the monster? And I might try and answer that question a little bit more concretely in the story itself. You could enjoy something and critique it. Anita Sarkeesian, Gamergate, right? Anita Sarkeesian wasn't trans, but there were other trans people who experienced transphobia at the same time. Anita Sarkeesian, who as far as I remember wasn't trans, but was experiencing sexism from Gamergate types. So it's possible to enjoy something and critique its pernicious aspects. You don't just want to preserve it in its entirety.
Provided the show is good, and the filmmakers already have half their jobs done for them. It's literally a win-win-win. So I think the purpose of this show's existence is obvious. A proper adaptation of the source material that doesn't leave out important aspects of the plot, like the fact that Voldemort was conceived due to a love potion.
Again, it's all about what a filmmaker wants to focus on. You're not going to be able to fit everything into the story, and if you can include little details like that, I would say, let's focus on the fact that adds something to the story. Like if you're adapting a story, Lovecraft, for instance, you have people of color that are adapting Lovecraft to basically needle Lovecraft and take a traditionally racist story and transform it to make it anti-racist. It is possible to do that. I would say you could do the same thing with Harry Potter, which is a traditionally racist story.
But not until a year after they were married. Tom Riddle left while she was still pregnant. Yeah, Voldemort is a roofie baby.
Yeah, and there are topics like that that come up in a variety of Gothic stories. Read Sephoria or The Moor, where Victoria Doloredani in that story falls in love with a man, gets sick of him, poisons him slowly to death with the help of her Moor servant, who's actually the devil in disguise, but giving her a potion, specifically a poison vial, that she uses on this person over and over until he drops dead. And then she does that so she can marry his brother, but then she has to slowly poison him to death to wear down his mental defenses while kidnapping his child bride, putting her in a cave, getting sick of her, stabbing her to death, throwing her off a cliff, and then approaching the husband who's nearly dead and sick with worry because his wife is missing. He's dying from the poison. Victoria, tells him what she did with the help of her slave/Satan in disguise. This kind of thing is not unique to J.K. Rowling. In fact, it's Gothic pastiche that she largely ripped off to make a neoliberal story, a Blairite fantasy that is very centrist, but in ways that would decay through the franchise more broadly, to emphasize certain things, to encourage fascism and make money off it, just as you're doing now with not just J.K. Rowling, but also The Critical Drinker. So I don't disagree that Voldemort is a roofie baby, for instance, and that there are other problematic aspects about love in the story, namely Snape, who they decide to take the most problematic character in perhaps the entire story and make him a black guy, isn't really the win that I think you think it is. That being said, it doesn't change the fact that The Critical Drinker is a reactionary and they're going to respond accordingly, and you can point that out. That's perfectly valid. But what do you have to say about the fact that they made Snape black and the significance of that? He's an awful character in a lot of ways. He tortures children. He's a Nazi. Literally, on top of that, yeah, he's a double agent, but he still tortures children, okay? And he's still this weird incel. And you could say he's complicated and someone could play that character and do something interesting with it. Sure, that's fine. But I can still point out that of all the characters you had to make a minority, you had to pick that one. And there are pros and cons to that. Sure. But at the end of the day, what is the Birdman focusing on? They're not focusing on J.K. Rowling, and they're not really focusing on the racist implications of making a character that is going to invite a lot of criticism. There is a conversation to be had about making a problematic, famous character in a story like this a person of color, which will invite reactionary dialogues. You can talk about that, but it's also something that I think feels clunky. You know, let's just make Snape black. Okay, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that unto itself, but it's taking an actor of color, making them play Snape, a deeply problematic character, in a deeply racist story. What I want to know is, are they going to say anything anti-racist within the narrative about that? Anything that is not transphobic within the narrative? What are they doing beyond just making the character black? That's what I want to know.
Children's book.
Not really. I mean, Gothic literature was sold to younger audiences since the inception of the Gothic novel as a modern concept, basically from Radcliffe onwards, the 1790s. But these were deeply campy stories that would talk about all manner of things. So they are right. The Critical Drinker is wrong to say, oh, this is just a children's story and young adult fiction can't be mature, because it absolutely can be. And oftentimes it's sort of a gateway to larger, more serious topics that are dressed up in trashy media like the Gothic.
The movies don't have any of that. And for those of you who are movie only, I probably just blew your mind.
Yeah, I didn't know that specific fact about Voldemort. It goes to show that not everything is included within the films. Something that I think they could have included, and it actually would have been kind of thought-provoking. Drugging someone to have sex with them and have a child without their consent is also unto itself anti-Semitic, because witches, love potions are originally anti-Semitic tropes from the Middle Ages into the Renaissance. Hammer of Witches out of the 1400s was anti-Semitic, it was sexist, and it was anti-pagan, essentially, in ways that there's something to be said about J.K. Rowling's treatment of witches in ways that are racist, anti-Semitic, sexist, transphobic. Her treatment of werewolves as a metaphor for AIDS and homosexuality, basically falling out of the bigoted tree and hitting every branch on the way down. But if they had included that in the films in a way that was more actively not bigoted, I would be interested to see that, but they just left it out entirely. And that's an interesting thing to raise.
On the plus side, all that extra runtime offers the chance to expand on stuff from the novels that either had to be cut or massively simplified for the sake of movie making, which is nice, I guess. Shit man, it might even do my boy Ron justice this time around. Seriously, the Ron from the books is such a wildly different character from the film version, it's
The one who apologizes for racism?
not even funny. He's snarky, he's quick-witted and assertive, he's angsty about his poor background, but he takes no shit from people about it. He argues regularly with Hermione, and he actually wins a lot of the time. On the other hand, I can't say I was exactly desperate to watch the same story get rehashed again, even if it came with a few extra bells and whistles attached.
Why not? Remakes are a dime a dozen these days with...
Yeah, it's an opportunity to remake a story and do something different. The problem is when they're not really doing anything different. Is the inclusion of a black actor as Snape adding anything positive to the story in terms of activism challenging fascism or not? That's what I'm going to be asking.
Video games, movies, and TV shows. Heck, you have 3 videos talking about Dune, all of which are positive.
And Dune being a story that was written by a libertarian Republican author who was so homophobic that he wouldn't talk to his own son, a gay activist who died of AIDS.
Are you unaware this is the 4th attempt to tell the story of Dune? I wonder why this remake in particular is rustling your jimmies.
And well, there's the other issue to consider. The first Harry Potter movie came out a quarter of a century ago, and Hollywood is a very different place from what it was in 2001.
Kinda, but mainly because of people like you. Obviously, with this overused clip of a person screaming at the inauguration of Trump,
which has dire implications for minorities. This was in anticipation of the rising violence against various minorities, people of color, yes, but also trans people more broadly, racial minority or otherwise. Trans people are a minority unto themselves. There's not very many of us. So this scream is entirely merited.
And let's be frank, she was fucking right.
Yes, she was. I don't know their gender. This person was right.
You're implying that the movie industry is more so-called woke than it was when the first Harry Potter film released in 2001. And that's simply not true. The film industry was progressive back then, too.
I would argue or counter-argue that the film industry isn't some bastion of activism. Rainbow capitalism is a thing, and it affects trans people. It affects people of color, where they will allow certain people into the theater to perform while at the same time tokenizing them. And this is a problem in the present state of affairs, but also back when the first Harry Potter films were being made.
Just too young to notice or care, but the conservatives of that era were just as much of a whiny bitch then as you are now.
So again, the dialogue here is one where the Birdman, a moderate person of color critiquing reactionaries, is debating them in the free marketplace of ideas. Oh, they are calling this person out for being bigoted without really saying anything terribly radical themselves. In fact, they're apologizing for popular institutions of media that, according to them, were relatively progressive. But I would argue that they were relatively choosy about how progressive they were to serve profit. And the moment that was challenged, they would pull it away. Or in the words of Frank Zappa, the moment the illusion becomes too expensive to maintain, they will pull aside all of the window dressing, and you will see the brick wall at the back of the theater. We need to be more critical of these institutions and franchises than the Birdman is doing, who is basically grifting while punching down against reactionaries in a moderate way that doesn't actually serve people of color any more than trans people. Going after low-hanging fruit alone is what got us into this situation. And we have to be critical not just of reactionaries, but people who are more moderate. Two wings of the same bird. You have to critique capital more broadly as a giant predatory device.
Specifically for this very topic, Harry Potter, conservatives tried to have it banned for promoting witchcraft. I mean, one of the heroes is an intelligent heroine, the smartest student in the school. And
what happened to witches more broadly? The Salem witch trial persecuted young women, members of the in-group. So this is just the cannibalizing of in-group members under fascism.
Is the epitome of what you would call a girl boss today. The villains of the story believe in pure blood supremacy. The school itself is multicultural and multiracial.
The school is a neoliberal institution that dials back these very things and is invaded by fascism. But again, this symbol of the Radcliffean child detectives that are uncovering the Gothic villain goes all the way back to Anne Radcliffe in ways that are ultimately, I would argue, moderate to conservative in nature. Anne Radcliffe was not progressive any more than J.K. Rowling was centuries later, and the very problems present within Harry Potter in and outside of itself showcase that the multicultural elements of Hogwarts are unto themselves disguises or camouflages for imperialism, for empire in Britain and the United States. The United States is a melting pot, is a multicultural institution that Obama in the 20-aughts made his famous speech, A More Perfect Union, where he talked about American values such as finding value for the American immigrant in ways, the white American immigrant, mind you, that took rights away from people of color and queer people as well. It's neoliberalism. And if it can happen in America, it also happens in Britain. And just pointing out that Hogwarts is multicultural and it's this positive thing. No, it's a space, a gentrified private school for witches and wizards where you can go if you fit in. But do you see any queer people in this lineup? I mean, there may be one or two people who are queer-coded in a way that is sort of whispered about hush-hush, but by and large, this is J.K. Rowling's Blairite version of inclusivity under New Labour in Britain. This isn't strictly a positive thing. You can't just say, well, we're multicultural and call it a day. Intersectionality has to be total in ways that actually challenge capital, which relies on exploitation to prey on workers. This specific image in a neo-Gothic sort of pastiche doesn't challenge that, and is something that you're completely unequipped to critique yourself. You're just saying, oh, well, they have different racial minorities. Okay, well, what about trans people? What roles do racial minorities have in the Harry Potter story? Cho Chang? Anyone? Parvati Patil and her sister? These characters are token, by and large, and the characters with the largest sort of role in the story are white. It's still racist. Everyone else is basically window dressing.
With people from non-magical backgrounds admitted, as long as they display an aptitude for magic, which would stand in direct opposition to the ideology of blood purity that underpins the series' central antagonists. In other words, the very institution where the story takes place is built on the rejection of inherited superiority.
There is an air of superiority. Have you seen how Harry and company talk about other people? Gryffindor syndrome? Like, Gryffindor are a bunch of assholes, and they are designed to compete against each other. It's Luke Skywalker dressed up in school robes. He's a schoolyard bully, and he has to overcome various bigotries. Like, Harry's an asshole in the books. And this isn't just something that I talk about. See Sean's Harry Potter, where he talks about a variety of mean-spirited things tied to J.K. Rowling's Blairite attitude through New Labour. Yeah, there are reactionaries in the story, but then Harry Potter is basically the white version of you, overlooking the problems in ways where throughout the story, the most that he achieves is he becomes a cop at the end of the story. And that's not good enough. I'm sorry.
Harry Potter was woke way before you ever heard that Black American slang word.
It was woke, but only so far, right? It wasn't anti-racist. It wasn't anti-sexist. It wasn't anti-transphobic or just queerphobic more broadly. It had plenty of bigotries. It wasn't that woke, and you're basically defending J.K. Rowling's franchise in light of trans genocide in the United States, which is supremely fucked up. So you're to look good in the eyes of your audience while critiquing, punching up against a reactionary. You are punching down against a variety of people, including members of your own community, to defend capital first and foremost, which is what Harry Potter is. J.K. Rowling is a billionaire, and this is a billion-dollar franchise that has existed for decades in ways that you're saying, actually, it was really woke. it wasn't that woke, trust me.
And yesterday, the first trailer dropped for season 1, so what the fuck do I actually think about it? Well, this one left me feeling confused. Right off the bat, the tone of the trailer is bizarrely dark, serious and heavy, all muted colours and washed out lighting, and overlaid with that booming, ominous Hans Zimmer score that feels more like a grandiose, painfully serious Zack Snyder superhero flick than a whimsical kid's adventure.
You sound like you're getting your criticism from Twitter, Will. These are all movie-only fan criticisms. The series was dark from the beginning. I mean, what part of Harry being bullied by his literal blood relatives was whimsical? They forced him to live in a cupboard under the stairs. They'd leave him with Mrs. Fig when they went off to have fun at amusement parks. Then, when he finally arrived at Hogwarts, he got bullied by students and a teacher for something that happened in the past that he had...
Snape, no less. For incredibly fucked up reasons.
...nothing to do with. And there was a plot to kill him. This is all in the first book. Just look at how Roger Ebert describes that first book. The idea that the Harry Potter series got darker and darker as the story went on is massively overstated. It was always an unrelenting story of a boy overcoming nearly impossible odds.
I would argue, as I said previously, that it's also not that woke. It's basically Star Wars, or similar monomythic fiction with a gothic sort of pastiche that, unto itself, is actually pretty milquetoast. And the inclusivity that it had from start to finish has always been dubious at best, and that includes into the present space and time. So I would be willing to critique the inclusion of a black actor in Harry Potter the same way that I would be critical of any minority. Don't you know the franchise that you're joining, what it serves? At this point, it serves nothing but genocide. And it's possible to enjoy it, but we need to be critical. You're giving money to a franchise that is helping further genocide. That's a perfectly valid critique. It's just the critical drinker isn't capable of doing that because he's a reactionary, but the Birdman isn't capable of doing it because he's a moderate.
The books just got thicker.
Don't get me wrong, the intention's obviously to contrast the bleak concrete jungle of the Muggle world with the vibrant magic and colours of Hogwarts, but holy shit, we're not launching into some deadly serious epic fantasy here. The John Williams score from the movies was absolutely pitch perfect for Harry Potter, combining intrigue and mystery with an undertone of adventure and danger, and
basically gothic pastiche, a story that was the young adult fiction of its day that back in the day was called terrorist literature. They were afraid that it would infect the minds of the nation's youth in Britain, specifically women.
just a hint of playfulness to remind you that yes, you're allowed to have fun with this one. The characters, on the other hand, are a bit of a mixed bag. The kids all look fine, I guess. The lead actor for Harry doesn't quite have the same spark and charisma that...
Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here just because I want to try and focus on the racism type stuff.
But let's talk about Snape, bro. We know that's what you really want to get to.
Oh yeah, and Snape's in the trailer as well, and I'll be honest, I think the casting department did a great job with this one. Apart from the hooked nose, the greasy straight hair, the thin physique, and the pale sallow skin.
I also want to point out that this is like anti-Semitic caricature, right? He's literally the backstabbing Jew, like the big beaky nose, the pale skin, the dark hair. He is the Italian from Anne Radcliffe and into Orientalism, into anti-Semitic tropes. Like, this was already a problematic stereotype unto itself. I don't have a problem working within taboos, but I'm just highlighting that there's a racialized character to Snape even when he had white skin, because racism isn't determined by skin color alone, and it's not, I would add, monopolized by people of color. It's something that can affect, for instance, Irish people. It can affect indigenous people. It can affect indigenous people on American soil and overseas on other indigenous lands that have been taken by imperialist forces. My partner, Bay Ryan, is Marley and Irish, and they have pale skin. And indigenous people in that part of the world, the Torres Strait, New Zealand, and Australia, often call themselves black, B-L-A-K, don't always have dark skin color. So shadism is a thing that extends to settler colonial violence more broadly under imperialism, capital, imperialism being the highest stage of capitalism from the 20th century onwards, out of the age of imperialism before that, the 1800s, and the rise of Gothic fiction the century before that, these are things that affect a wide variety of people. So African Americans don't have a monopoly on racism, and it's entirely possible to critique Harry Potter for its racist dialogues without even making Snape black.
He's the spitting image of Snape from the books. Joking aside, race swapping such a prominent character that was clearly described as white in the books and was played to absolute perfection by Alan Rickman in the movies was a pretty dumb decision, because ultimately it's just going to overshadow everything else about this show.
No, you can fuck around with stuff like that. What does it serve? You know, you can change different aspects about someone, radically even, and as long as it says something positive or it opens up the opportunity to have conversations about race, I don't see the harm unto itself. If they take a character and there are going to be racist things about that because people such as yourself, but also just within the story diegetically, there might be issues. I could say the same thing about Wicked and making Elphaba a person of color when green skin isn't automatically symbolic of people of color. Again, it's anti-Semitic. It ties to persecuting women as witches and any other scapegoat that you could think of. That, yeah, if you make it black, is that a problem unto itself? Not intrinsically, it's about what you do with it.
Only if you're a racist douchebag that is concerned with blood purity. Hey, where have I heard that one before?
It's also important to recognize that I don't have a problem with racist characters in stories, including Nazis, communists, cops, victims, and different arrangements of power. So I'm not against Star Wars. I'm not against Harry Potter and other stories as far as interrogating them and understanding. These are tropes of vaudeville, of kayfabe, of Amazonomachia that have existed for millennia. Under the 20th century going forwards, kayfabe or wrestling theater through stories out of the 50s into Bretton Woods and neoliberalism. You saw the rise of Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and Harry Potter. These are just popular storytelling devices, black and white, good, evil, us versus them, where Nazis and communists occupy the same centrist stages. It's the allegory of Star Wars, right? Where there is going to be a element of fascism and communism. Does Voldemort strictly represent fascist reactionary ties? I would argue in his case, yes. But what do communists get accused of being all the time? Nazis, right? So these kinds of dialogues, I'm totally okay with having characters like Voldemort and discussions about racial purity and working with different taboos that are concerned with mixing too much, or not mixing enough, blood purity, blood drop, blood libel. It comes with the territory, but what is done with it in a way that is conducive through allegory and activism to prevent these things in and out of these stories? What's the underlying struggle? Is it a defense of the status quo, of capital, like Rowling ultimately was about? The wizarding world may as well be the free world fighting terrorism. Nazis are oftentimes courted within capital to defend itself from communism. And so-called communists oftentimes only say it on the tin. Nazis, National Socialism, and the Bolsheviks being queerphobic themselves from Stalin onwards.
The casting of Snape is very interesting for a variety of reasons, but again, we are talking about a fictional character whose ethnicity isn't integral to their characterization. For Snape to work, all you need is an anti-hero that was in love with Harry Potter's mother, bullied by Harry Potter's father, worked for the Dark Lord, switched sides after Harry's mother was killed, and is a piece of shit to Harry due to the hatred for Harry's father.
Yeah. Similar to having Antoinette Causeway from White Sargasso Sea, who was racially coded in ways that spoke to how she was treated because of her race. The Mad Woman in the Attic was locked up because she was a carryover from British colonialism more broadly in ways that deeply exploitative in Jane Eyre, written by Charlotte Bronte. And if you made that character white, you would be ignoring the deeply racist aspects of that story that were central to the character. That was the whole point of the character. And if you make them anything other than racially what they were, which was a slave of the British Empire from one of their colonies, and Mr. Rochester sort of kept her in the attic because he loved her, but he treated her like a slave, and it's kind of trying to have it both ways. And ultimately she's killed to further the narrative between Jane Eyre, the white woman, and Mr. Rochester, reader, I married him. For that to happen, the woman in the attic, the woman of color in the attic, literally had to die. So in the case of Snape, he's already racially coded, just in a way that doesn't focus on skin color. He's the backstabber. He's the backstabbing Jew. And they swap that out for a different racial minority. That doesn't really change anything. In fact, it kind of tracks, I would argue.
Nothing about any of that suggests Snape has to be white. As long as the character has everything I just named, that's Snape.
Yeah, and I think that's totally fair. They're overlooking the racial character of Snape even when he had white skin, but they're not wrong. That's a valid argument.
You people routinely have a meltdown over non-issues like this. It's amazing. If this one character is going to overshadow the entire story for you, good news. The books and the original movies still exist.
I would not support them. In my opinion, there are plenty of other queer authors that you could read that don't endorse fascism through their actions. So it's all about, would you buy sugar or honey during slavery in Jane Austen's day? In America today, would you continue buying Harry Potter or would you buy the Animorphs? It's another franchise, but one that isn't transphobic, racist, sexist, what have you.
You can go consume them and be happy. For those of us that don't care about a fictional character's skin tone, we will all go on with our lives.
Yeah, but again, just swap these out for Mein Kampf and you get my point. Harry Potter is a Blairite neoliberal fiction that is conducive to fascism. It has decayed into fascism in and outside of itself. So this image of you basically showcases that you're endorsing the franchise, making money off it, while turning a blind eye to its own history in and out of itself. That's a deeply problematic thing.
It's basically the only thing that anyone's talking about right now, and based on the ratio on that first trailer, the talk has not been positive.
Being a trans woman academic sex worker on YouTube, I can safely say that, all right, the stuff that I write or say is going to get ratioed. But that's generally coming from moderates and reactionaries. Socialists, Marxist-Leninists that I disagree with, I don't say things to win a popularity contest. I say things to challenge capitalism. And I would argue, to some extent, the same basic idea applies to Harry Potter or anything. The like to dislike ratio unto itself doesn't really mean a whole lot.
More people like this than people disliked this. Am I going crazy, or can you people not do math? I mean, I could understand if this inaccurate plugin that I keep telling you people not to use because it's fucking inaccurate was showing a higher number of dislikes than the likes, but you're literally showing that more people liked this than disliked it. You're debunking yourself, is what I'm saying. Also, YouTube dislikes are never a worthwhile measure of anything, especially with situations like this, because people like you will teach people to dislike these things and exacerbate the problem artificially.
I would argue that the like ratio is the same idea. If a bunch of bigoted people like a racist piece of media, the like side of that equation is also largely suspect.
It's channels like yours that have taught people to hate brigade and review bomb things. So you showing me this is entirely meaningless, and that's besides the fact that more people liked the trailer than disliked it.
It's also exposing the actor to a lot of hate that he absolutely doesn't deserve. And for what?
It is important to keep in mind that if you hire someone in a situation where they are hired to play a specific role, they are going to be on the receiving end of that kind of thing. Sure, but I would argue the actor is well aware of that, and they're taking a paycheck anyways, which unto itself is something we could critique. You're taking money from J.K. Rowling, regardless of your skin color. That is worthy of criticism, but that's a different argument.
What does all this accomplish, really? Is it going to improve the show? Will it get more people to watch it? Or
maybe. There's no way to know. Right? It all depends on what they say. What do they do with it? Like any story.
Does it just become a convenient shield to hide behind so you can dismiss any and all criticism, no matter how valid or well-intentioned?
there is a kernel of truth to this statement. Now, I will say that The Critical Drinker is deeply reactionary, and their criticisms of people of color appearing in any form of media is unto itself not something we should consider as anything other than problematic, as reactionary, as harmful, as fascist. But in the same breath, if I turn around and say, well, I can critique a person of color in this story more broadly through a criticism of neoliberalism in franchise media, and if someone were to turn around and say, you can't critique people of color at all, or they would act like that's somehow beyond the pale, I would be like, all right, well, you don't want to gatekeep criticism just because of someone's race. So that can go both ways. The critical drinker is only using it one way, but someone who uses it the other way, as we'll see, is the Birdman.
That's nothing more than ignorant bigotry.
Please pay attention to what Drinker is saying here. He's planting the seeds early, teaching his audience of bigots to hide behind the guise of criticism when they inevitably review bomb this thing.
It's the fascist taking of the language of rebellion to wage, in Parenti's words, a false rebellion in defense of the same old moneyed interests. The problem is those same moneyed interests can be defended in moderate ways, by the Birdman, as we'll see, while using the language of racial inclusivity to overlook the problems of capital in Harry Potter and elsewhere.
These people do this all the time. When they get called out for their obvious bigotry, they try to retreat to this phony-ass criticism excuse. I can see all the bad writing tweets already. Besides, this doesn't make any sense. If we know they're being more accurate to the source material, and we know people like that source material, there's nothing to worry about.
That's not true. What if you're being faithful to the source material and it's Mein Kampf? Or what if you're being faithful to the source material and it's Harry Potter, a series that is historically bigoted in a variety of ways, including racism? R.E. Cho Chang and various other characters of color. Kingsley Shacklebolt, a deeply racist character, and the treatment of other characters besides in racist ways, including, I would argue, Snape, even before he had black skin. So there are still things to worry about.
Snape will be exactly like he was in the book. And if he isn't, that will be a fair criticism and no...
No, see, again, it's not about adhering strictly to something. So I don't agree with this argument. You could say, if it's different, how is it different and why?
One will call you a racist for pointing that out. But enough with the preemptive victimhood. You deserve every accusation of bigotry.
Actually, I would call you racist in that way because you're defending an institution that is bigoted in ways that uphold capital, which is a racist hegemon, by ignoring all these awful things that exist within the franchise: racism, transphobia, sexism, etc. And if you change something about the franchise and it is different and you're not willing to critique that, or you're endorsing it, not endorsing it in a way that upholds capital, I personally would call you racist. But it's a highly specific academic argument. And it's something that's ultimately critical of capital, which neither you nor the critical drinker are willing to do. It's low-hanging fruit on both fronts.
Because you are a bigot, Will. Stop pretending that label doesn't fit you while doing everything in your power to fucking earn it. Why are you racists so afraid of being labeled what you clearly are? Are you not the guy that compared King Kong to African slaves?
The Birdman is critical of regarding the critical drinker comparing King Kong to African slaves. But this is a story where King Kong is taken from his island and displayed in America in a slave-like way. There is an allegory there. There is a racial allegory, recognizing a larger racist allegory to a story, the same way that you might with Frankenstein, young Frankenstein, where Frankenstein is put on stage, a giant, tall, ugly, hideous figure that was created by man under Cartesian thought. This would include how Enlightenment thinkers viewed people of color. It's the same basic idea. It's not racist to point that out. That's not what the critical drinker is doing, but would you have a problem with me, an academic trans woman, anti-racist, would look at King Kong and be like, yeah, there is a racial allegory. Would you turn around and say that I'm racist for pointing that out? You don't just get a pass because you punch down at reactionaries and because of the color of your skin. Anyone can be racist, And being an anti-intellectual is a core tenet of fascism with, in your case, a neoliberal veneer through franchised media.
Did you see a giant ape and think black people?
Again, it is possible to see something like that and be like, wow, this feels kind of racist, huh? Like, King Kong is a racist story. It also has to do with the fear of white women being with people of color. Oh no, King Kong and the heroine is abducted by a great ape, taken to an island, depending on the version, is also populated with cannibals and killer insects, and just, it's an ethnocentric refrain from the age of imperialism in the 19th century, the 1800s. There's a racial character there, and one that carries over into stories like Alien. The black passenger is a giant person of color in a gimp suit who rapes other people, including white women. So yeah, this is something that exists in popular media, in Gothic media, out of fantasy and science fiction into the present day. Fantasy and sci-fi emerged from the Gothic into stories like King Kong, which emerged around the same time that The Mountains of Madness was written. And then after that, Forbidden Planet and Alien. These are older ethnocentric refrains.
Why do you use AI imagery of black people crying as your thumbnails?
That is racist, absolutely.
Will, why do you go out of your way to shit on movies people have never heard of, but review movies like Sinners on your second channel where your normal audience won't see it? Will, if you're not a racist, you're doing a damn good impression of one.
I don't doubt that the critical drinker's statements about King Kong are bigoted because they're reactionary. But if you can isolate a racist allegory in King Kong, that unto itself isn't a problem. Comparing King Kong to slave narratives is actually pretty accurate. But what do you do with that? And if you're reactionary and you're doing that, yeah, you're racist, because reactionary people are racist.
There's a reason most fans let out a collective groan these days every time a new remake or reboot of an old franchise gets announced. It's because the culture that allowed the original versions to get made the way they were just does not exist anymore. And
cultures change over time. That isn't necessarily a negative thing.
What we get instead tends to be a lazy, pandering, badly written facsimile of it.
All criticisms that date all the way back to the Gothic. When Anne Radcliffe wrote her novels, those were unto themselves rehashed time and time again by people chasing money. Anne Radcliffe was the first woman paid for a novel that made a substantial sum of money. Like, I imagine various isolated cases before that, but Anne Radcliffe was basically the first female novelist who wrote Gothic fiction centuries before J.K. Rowling. And other people imitated that, men and women. They called her the Great Enchantress. They called her the female Shakespeare. And she introduced a degree of elegance and sophistication to the Gothic, which up until that point was seen as trashy. E.g., Matthew Lewis's The Monk, his story about, among other things, rape and incest and trans people and cross-dressing is basically JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So there was a moderate character even back then. There was a reactionary element tied to capital, to unrest, to upheaval during the French Revolution.
But you know what does still exist? The original property.
Which you shouldn't support. Stop plugging Harry Potter. It's bigoted, it's racist, it's transphobic. Stop doing that. Have you no decency?
Morons talk like the originals just disappear when the new version comes out. Fam, Harry Potter is the best-selling book series of all time.
A boy that has a lightning bolt tattoo on his forehead, a scar, but I digress. Make it double lightning bolt, and you get my point. Like, again, Harry Potter is not above criticism. Stop deifying it. You're deifying it just like the critical drinker is, just from a moderate standpoint.
If you have a problem with the skin tone of one of the actors, go reread the books again.
Yeah, and even then, the racism is still present because Snape is a racially coded character. He's an outsider. He's a barbarian. He's a Nazi. He's anti-Semitic. He has a big nose, black hair. He's Eastern coded. It's anti-Semitic. It's Orientalist. They could have made him Arab instead of black. The same idea. It's possible for there to be a racist character in the original story, but here you are critiquing that. Well, uncritically, you're endorsing the original stories, celebrating them. instead of critiquing them. This is how you and the critical drinker have more in common, despite the fact that you like to treat you and him as different, as if he's racist and you're not. By plugging Harry Potter uncritically while punching down at reactionaries, but not holding J.K. Rowling and the franchise at large to task, you yourself are racist. It's black skin, white masks. You're token.
Hell, listen to the audiobooks. Watch the movies for the millionth time.
The money made through all of these purchases goes towards trans genocide, and by extension, racism more broadly, because who do you think they're going to go after they're done with us? People of color. This isn't activism. This isn't good for anyone, except for J.K. Rowling and company. And you, the Birdman, are a shill for J.K. Rowling.
Just pretend this doesn't exist. I don't understand why this bothers you people so much. Is it FOMO? Can you not stand when others are having a good time and you can't because your bigotry doesn't allow you to enjoy a media property?
And your bigotry doesn't allow you to critique said media in ways that overlook or pretend like fascism doesn't exist, which is unto itself a form of tokenism.
Stop being a bitch.
I would say the same to you. Grow a pair and actually critique J.K. Rowling and this sacred cow that you refuse to barbecue. No offense, but you're going to have to start critiquing media a bit more severely. Otherwise, as fascism gets worse and worse, critical drinker is going to be the least of your problems.
When I'm not interested in something, I just don't watch it. I don't get on YouTube and cry to my echo chamber.
That's not the mark of a good critic. Oh, I'm not interested. I'm not going to watch this. Okay. Can you view it outside a lens of pure consumerism instead of just being like, well, I don't feel like watching it. Well, I don't feel like watching this video of yours, but I'm going to because it's important. I have to say what I need to say to promote anti-racism, to promote anti-Zionism, anti-white supremacy, anti-transphobia, etc.
While dog whistling for them to go dislike a trailer. You're a grown-ass man, dude. Act like it.
I would say the same to you. Grow up and stop picking low-hanging fruit. Go after those who need to be critiqued, that you're deifying. Rowling and her franchise.
Anyway, let's see what Nerdrotic is up to.
This is basically a continuation of different people other than the critical drinker, and that is certainly important and everything, but I'm going to skip that because it's kind of a rehash. But I did want to conclude the video by going over one other talking point, one that I had at the very start of the video. Like there's a point here where they say, is racism just a form of stupidity? Yes, but racism doesn't just apply to the critical drinker, it also applies to the Birdman and his moderate forms of racism, black skin, white masks, defending J.K. Rowling, specifically here.
Potter is an unstoppable franchise at this point. Every attempt to quash it has failed, from the Christian groups in the 90s to the people trying to boycott Hogwarts Legacy.
They're both siding this in defense of Harry Potter. And again, I will say, as I said at the start of the video, do you know why people were boycotting Hogwarts Legacy? It wasn't just trans people, it was also people, left-leaning people, or people, socialists more broadly, people of color, BIPOC people, black, brown, indigenous, etc., or people with fairer skin, my partner Bay Ryan, who's Irish and Mali, are critiquing Harry Potter because it's racist, transphobic, sexist. All of these things go arm in arm. And you're saying, why would you boycott Harry Potter, the franchise that can't die? Why would you critique Capital? Why would you critique aspects of Capital? Because it's not going anywhere. This is capitalist realism that's both sizing things, and you're punching down at people like Nerdrotic and the critical drinker while punching up at people like me. I saw this part of the video and took it personally, not just for myself, but other people I work with, including people of color, including sex workers, including indigenous people, disabled people, intersex people. One of my partners is intersex. Many of my partners, and myself included, are survivors of sexual abuse. J.K. Rowling doesn't have a monopoly on that, and we criticize popular media through the work that we do. You don't appear to because you're literally shilling for J.K. Rowling. And that's what I wanted to end on here is by pointing that out. Everything that I've said up until this point has been illustrative of the fact that you are allergic to allegory. Kind of like Tolkien, for example. Tolkien had stories in Lord of the Rings that were basically racial allegories. People with green skin, eastwardly, that in the Peter Jackson adaptation specifically, they made the orcs people of color. The orcs in those movies were played by indigenous people, the Maori of New Zealand, who aren't white. There was a racialized character, and racism in Tolkien is something that has been criticized extensively, not just J.K. Rowling and racism through various videos, Sean's video, or other trans people who are responding right now to J.K. Rowling. Similar criticisms can be applied to Tolkien. RE, racism in Tolkien, where I get rather upset about what's being said in defense of Tolkien. If you're going to defend Tolkien, congratulations, you're racist. And if you defend J.K. Rowling, it is also bigoted. And if you don't believe me, let's take a look real quick at different conversations that can be had academically about Tolkien's racism. The same conversations that we could have about J.K. Rowling's bigotry as well. So this is just a Tumblr conversation that was sent to me by a fellow Tolkien fan who was criticizing Tolkien for his racism. Obligatory disclaimer from I'm So Bad at Nicknames number 2 that this is not a Tolkien was actually super progressive post, which is an opinion that way too many people on this website seem to hold. LMAO. Anyways, I think it's really interesting how Tolkien himself was much more critical of his portrayal of the orcs as an evil race trademark than a lot of his modern fans are. Like, it's really interesting how the guy spent the rest of his life trying to square the fact that portraying the orcs as inherently evil creatures is almost a necessity of the sort of story he was writing, because otherwise it's kind of hard to feature multiple battle scenes where a substantial chunk of your cast of protagonists kill dozens of them and come out looking morally virtuous on the other side, with the fact that the concept of an entire species of creatures that is both sapient and ontologically evil was largely incompatible with his particular branch of Christianity. Centrally unplanned response, generally endorsed, but I would challenge the he had orcs as a storytelling necessity to allow his heroes to fight battles and still be good guys. Modern writers have this issue, but Tolkien did not. His source world of medieval European literacy and poetic works is filled to the brim with heroes who mow down human enemies in battle and get a pat on the back for it. That is a key part of what makes them heroes. Dying and killing in battle is normalized and lacks any of the ethical dilemma we have with it today. You can confirm this because Tolkien's heroes kill a lot of humans. LOL. The enemies of Saruman and Sauron are all mixed human-orc. Aragorn actually spent years of his youth fighting a war for Gondor against the pirates of Umbar, killing nothing but humans. Now Tolkien is also a modern man. He humanizes those enemies at times in ways the Song of Roland never would, most famously in a passage from IIRC Sam's POV. The hobbits serve that contrast role, but not to the point where there is any problem heroically for the main characters to fight them. The movies downplayed the human enemy factions or made them fantastical for their own genre reasons, so I think some people understandably forget that prevalence. The importance of the orcs to Tolkien beyond the basic it's badass storytelling nuts and bolts is his deep affection for the genre of fairy tales, which was his life's goal to rehabilitate as an adult genre. He has all this theology about the godliness of acts of creation, the nature of corruption, etc., which orcs embody, that he wants on the page, because having just human enemies neglects the power of these stories. Tolkien's most famous academic work, The Monsters and the Critics, is kind of about exactly this in regards to Beowulf. His academic peers spent decades going, why is this crucial historical text wasting my time with dragons when it could be giving me details about 6th century medieval politics? And he defends the monsters just as important to the culture as a form of expression as the real stuff. Heroes in fairy tales fight monsters. It is the lodestone of the genre thematically, and Tolkien would never neglect it. Someone else responds, I am Cybersmith. That feels like a little bit of an oversimplification. Yes, Tolkien took a lot of inspiration from medieval and pre-medieval European storytelling, but he wasn't just a modern man looking at the past. He was a modern man looking at modernity. There's an element of his story that isn't present in Beowulf or any of the other old works, and it's industrialization. Tolkien saw industrialization as a dehumanizing, corrupting force, something that took individual men and women, then turned them into mere tools for war. His tensions with killing large numbers of people in battle should be viewed in light of that fact, as he personally experienced it. This was an author who wrote at least some of his works after seeing his countrymen cut down like wheat in a field by enemy machine guns, and then turned those same weapons onto people wearing different uniforms. Orcs are particularly identified with industrialization. Unlike the towering, brutish tribal warriors of Blizzard and Games Workshop, Tolkien's orcs are small, weak, cunning creatures. They work extensively with metal. They have a productive capacity that exceeds any of the human polities of the Third Age. The PJ films don't dwell on this, but they do depict it. Orcs are using mass-produced armor and swords, poured into molds without the loving care of an expert craftsman. They use explosives and composite crossbows. I think this is where some of the tension comes from, and how Tolkien thought of the orcs and of warfare, modern warfare specifically. He saw war as something which had the potential to be glorious and medieval, but under malign influences like industrialization, it also had the potential to be brutal and depersonalizing. The man who wrote The Charge of the Rohirrim also wrote The Dead Marshes. The orcs aren't just fairy tale monsters. They are in some ways almost a creature we might associate with science fiction, and keep in mind that Tolkien would likely have been familiar with the Morlocks and Martians of H.G. Wells, at least. Industrialization gone to hell. Compare Doctor Who's Cybermen or the Borg from Star Trek. Something recognizably a person, but degraded and warped by industrialized mass production and the logic of the conveyor belt. Orcs equal different things at once, like any monster, e.g. smog equals rarefied cruelty, commentary on modernity. Specifically, rarefied cruelty from medieval thought. I've written elsewhere, from this specific post, Tolkien was racist, e.g. Anderson Rierik's Why is the Only Good Orc a Dead Orc, 2004, but also Jeff Lasalla's Tolkien's Orcs, Bulldog and the Host of Tumult from 2021, detailing what Tolkien hated orcs, or struggled with them. Also, he was Zionistic in his writings, e.g. Dwarves Are Not Heroes, writes Rebecca Bracken in 2010. See my extensive research writings on Tolkien for even more reasons why he was a giant bigot, monarchist, and closeted gay man. Apart from my and these above examples, Dr. Stephen Shapiro also wrote to Reddit in 2003 regarding Tolkien's racism and Jackson's adaptations. Put simply, Tolkien's good guys are white and the bad guys are black, writes Shapiro. Slant-eyed, unattractive, inarticulate, and a psychologically undeveloped horde. In the trilogy, a small group, the Fellowship, is pitted against a foreign horde, and this reflects long-standing Anglo-European anxieties about being overwhelmed by non-Europeans, not just Africans, but also people from the East. This is inconsistent with Tolkien's Nordicist convictions. He thinks the northern races had a culture that was carried in the blood. While Tolkien describes the hobbits and elves as amazingly white, ethnically pure clans, their antagonists, the orcs, are a motley dark-skinned mass akin to tribal Africans or Aborigines. The recent films amplify a fear of a black planet and exaggerate this difference by insisting on stark, white-black color codes. Unquote. So again, racism is something that exists in Tolkien, and it can be critiqued in a variety of ways. But these are all different viewpoints that raise different concerns academically. From Tolkien wasn't super progressive, but Tolkien was still critical of orcs and spent a lot of time justifying it through violence. Someone saying, actually, in medieval dialogues, this kind of thing was normalized, and Tolkien thought it was important to such a degree as defending it in pre-modern texts like Beowulf into his stories, and someone saying that Tolkien was medieval and talking about pre-medieval storytelling, but he was a modern man also looking at modernity through that, to which I respond, all of these things can be true at the same time, and there are examples of this in the internet age, from Shapiro to Lasala to my own writing, critiquing not just basically racism versus people with dark skin, but also anti-Semitism, where the anti-Semitism of the dwarves extends to the anti-Semitism of the orcs. green skin doesn't necessarily mean African or the global south. It can also mean Jewish people. It can also mean people who are gender nonconforming, that works are producing in ways that are deemed as dark and unnatural. They are accused of drinking the blood of their enemies, of eating their flesh. Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys. So all of these different points can be true at the same time, or talking about racism in ways that overlap with sexism, with queerphobia more broadly. And it's important to have dialogues that don't just say, oh, well, wouldn't you know it, people on the left or trans people are just kind of complaining about J.K. Rowling in ways that are harmful to the franchises, which is what the Birdman ultimately cares about. They're not really that inclusive when it comes to being critical, and they focus overly on racism as something that doesn't overlap with other things that can hold J.K. Rowling, but also Harry Potter, accountable academically to a similar degree as Lord of the Rings and Orcs. J.K. Rowling uses a lot of the same devices to make money, the same way that Tolkien wrote his stories that ultimately made lots of money. We have to critique capital in ways that the Birdman ultimately doesn't. You have to do more than punch down at low-hanging fruit, and you have to critique capital itself. I want to be very clear that there is value in what the Birdman is saying, just as, ironically enough, there's value in The Critical Drinker, insofar as they show other people their ass, and we can critique them accordingly, both Drinker and the Birdman. The Birdman isn't nearly willing enough to critique capital, and instead says, you can buy all of these things, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, while essentially punching down at trans people in ways that are unfortunately, at this point, endemic to African Americans who are transphobic. The larger African American community has a portion of it that defends capital, generally fandoms that defend popular media alongside what's happening in real life. And by plugging Harry Potter as something that you can just consume unironically without shame, they are ignoring trans genocide happening alongside other genocides and settler colonial and police state violence in America and elsewhere. So, despite the fact that they have value and they often raise a lot of interesting points, even when they don't mean to, I can respond to them critically and point out that the Birdman is racist and transphobic themselves. They're just moderate about it. He is upholding capitalist realism in ways that are tantamount to genocide. If you don't criticize genocide through the media that helps uphold or defend genocide, you are not just complacent, but complicit. The moment I make people like the Birdman aware of what they're doing, and they keep doing what they're doing, they stop being complacent and they become responsible partly for genocide. Consumers can't just be consumers and consume dumbly. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to be responsible. If you consume something, it has to be done ethically, and it has to criticize capital, not uphold it through the very fascist levers that are racist, transphobic, sexist, what have you. So in any event, I tried to keep this video shorter by not going over the entire video and skipping portions of it, but also providing a variety of other perspectives that give context and nuance to what I'm saying while critiquing the Birdman alongside The Critical Drinker. I hope you found it useful. If you did, like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment. Every little bit helps. We need to stand together and critique capital and genocide more broadly against trans people, against people of color, against settler colonialism, and the police state domestically and abroad. Until next time, thank you for watching, comrades, and take care.